let's learn about the different types of variables. So just to start with, let's go with one of the examples. Suppose if you see that, let's take this example of smoking has a negative relationship with health. Now, what we are doing, we are just describing a theory, which means a relationship between two variables. What is a variable, first of all? Variable is something which has the capacity to vary when we move from one person to the other person or from one context to the other context. So let's suppose if smoking is our variable, when you ask different people how many cigarettes do they smoke, they're going to give you different answers. For example, one person is smoking, for example, 20 cigarettes a day. The other is smoking 10 cigarettes a day. Some people are not smoking at all. Some are smoking even more than 20. So the idea is that a variable should have the capacity to vary when we move from one person to the other person or from one context to the other person. Now, at the same time, there is another variable in this theory or in this statement, that is health. As we know that health of people vary from one another. So these are two variables. Now, if we draw these variables like this in a theoretical framework, because we are just describing a theory using these two variables. Now, if you try and make a sentence out of this diagram, we will get this sentence: smoking has a negative relationship with health. So now in this case, health is dependent on smoking, but only in this case. Therefore, we can say that health is a dependent variable. And in this case, which we are discussing, smoking is the independent variable. Because why? We are trying to say that smoking has a negative relationship with health. That means in this case, health is dependent on smoking. So health, when it is dependent on something, we call this variable as a dependent variable. And in this case, in this theoretical framework, in this theory, smoking will be known as independent variable. So these are the two types of variables. One is known as the dependent variable and the other is known as the independent variable. You can also have one idea that the arrow is always going from an independent variable towards the dependent variable. So therefore, health we can say is a dependent variable and smoking in this case is going to be an independent variable. I am insisting on in this case only because there might be a case in which smoking is a dependent variable or health is a independent variable. So you just have to look at the theoretical framework to understand that what kind of variables are these variables. Now let's just discuss another example which says that training has a positive relationship with performance. That if you train your employees, they, after getting some training, they have the capacity to perform well. So that means we can say that training leads to good performance, or we can also say that training has a positive relationship with performance, or we can also say that performance in this case is dependent on training, which means in this theory, in this case, in this statement, performance is a dependent variable and training is an independent variable. Now, here comes a little twist, and let's see what if there is an argument that training does not directly influence performance, but there's some kind of medium or some kind of intervening thing which is happening. Now, in this case, the new argument is that training actually leads to learning, and then learning leads to performance. So what is happening here is that first we were saying that training has a direct relationship with performance. There might be a relationship, but there's new argument that if you get training and suppose you do not learn anything, you will not be performing anything. So this argument supports another type of variable which is known as the intervening or a mediating variable. You're calling it a mediating variable. Why? Now, if we just try and define a mediating variable, it means that mediating variable is affected by the independent variable and then it affects the dependent variable. So it is something which is intervening or mediating between the independent and the dependent variable. So variables which are in between independent and dependent variable are known as mediating variables. Now, let's take this example a little further, and we say there's another argument that training will only cause learning if there is a presence of a good quality of a trainer. So we have added another variable which says that because of this variable, which is quality of the trainer in this case, because of this variable or because of the presence or absence of this variable, the relationship between these two variables will change, or this variable has the capacity to change the relationship between two variables. Now, these kind of variables are known as the moderating variables. Why? Because just because of their presence or absence, the relationship between independent and dependent variables change. So such variables are known as moderating variables. Now, one thing that we want to make clear here is that the main difference between the mediating and the moderating is that mediating is involved in the transaction. Mediating is involved in the dissemination of the effect, which means that training leads to learning and then learning leads to performance. But at the same time, the moderators are variables which are known as that because of their presence or absence, the relationship between two variables change. So let's take another example to discuss this thing. Now let's suppose there is a father who's the earning source in the family, and he gives some pocket money or some money to the mother, and then mother out of this $100 gives some money to the child. So in this case, mother is acting as a mediator because she's taking money or she's been given money by the father, and then the same path continues and she gives money to the child. So in this case, she is acting as a mediator. Now let's look at another example. Now, father is directly trying to give money to the child. Now, there's only a relationship between father and a child. But when the mother is present, the father gives the child 50 rupees or 100 rupees. But when mother is not present, father and child has a different relationship in terms of pocket money. So here, just because of the mother's presence or absence, the relationship between father and a child changes. So here she's acting as a moderator. Here in the above example, she's acting as a mediator because she's being affected by the father, and then in return she's affecting the child. But in the lower example, the presence or absence of mother changes the relationship between father and a child. So this can be another simple example of understanding mediation and moderation.